Good afternoon, podcast listeners. It's your boy Marcus Norman from Gentleman Style Podcast, your host of the number one podcast in America, coming to you live and direct. This is another thrilling episode, and as you probably saw in the screen title, is buying a house in the 2020 economic recession. And this is a unique one for me because it comes touches close to home about real estate. And what I love about real estate is a passive income that can produce in a long-term legacy that real estate can produce. But I wanted to touch on some key points because I wanted to provide some useful insight to you, my listeners, on what you can do to, if you were on the fence, basically, if you were on the fence and just wondering if you should make that transition, that house that you had your eye on for a while, and you were in the market and considering about buying a home. And so let me give you some useful tips, and I hope it's helpful to you, and I hope you see value in it. And if you do, please share that like button because it helps me. It helps me grow the podcast, and it helps me connect with other people that I can serve better. And so we'll start off with the pros. One of the benefits of buying a house, I think you should buy a house in this 2020 recession. No matter what we talk about today, no matter the ups and downs and swings left and right, I think it's always a good point to buy a home right now. Now, that being said, I'm going to give you some key points to think about um, right now. And there's going to be pros and there's going to be cons. But either way, I always think it's always good to own an asset and to own real estate and to, own your own home. So, but one of the biggest things, one of the key things I'm going to talk about here is making sure that you own a home that you can afford. Yes, afford is the key word today. Making sure that you own a home that you can afford and you can comfortably say, that this is mine and the expense of this home I can manage, right? And that's sometimes that can be missed or overlooked. People do it when they buy a car. When they buy a car, they buy the car because yep, I can afford the monthly payment on that car loan. Well, there's more to that vehicle than just a car loan. There's expenses, maintenance, gas. There's a whole network of other costs that comes with that vehicle. Repairs is a big one, especially depending on the vehicle that you buy. And so the same thing when buying a home, just because you can afford the mortgage payment does not mean you can afford the home. So you need to take into consideration the expenses, the utilities, the maintenance of that home when you buy that home. And making sure that you factor those things in to also come with the mortgage. Now, every month are you going to have maintenance costs? Probably not. But I guarantee you every month you will have utilities, right? So being able to make a wise decision on getting a house you can afford. I have a friend, it was her first home, and she bought a $50,000 home. And to some people, it's like, oh, that must not be a nice house. Doesn't matter. It's hers. It's her home, and she's raising her child in the home, and she's living within her means. And I guarantee you, all the expenses of that home is covered. She doesn't have to worry. Even now with this economic collapse, I guarantee you she has savings and she has money invested enough to where if stuff hit the fan that she could afford her home for several months because she bought something that was within her budget. And that $50,000 home will one day be hers, fully paid off and no strings attached. And so that's powerful. I have another friend that, you know, because one of the things in my earlier podcasts, I talk about the process of buying your first home and what things that you need to consider. Please go back and check that video out. I'm on iTunes, YouTube's, wherever, iHeartRadio, wherever you subscribe. Check out my podcast and go back to that episode of where I talked about buying your first home and the things that you need to be aware of. But I talk deeply in the costs and the expenses of buying that first home. And that will help you greatly figure out where you need to go and what things you need to be thinking about. But yes, buying that first home is always important to know the cost of that home and make sure that when you qualify for that house, when you go to your bank and you say, I want to get pre-approved for a loan to buy my first house, that your bank is going to shoot you out a number based off of whatever information and documents that you provided them. That number in this economic time, I would say shave off about 30 to almost 40% of that number. And that is what will really save your bacon, right? You never want to go all the way out. So if your bank approves you for $100,000, shave off 40% of that, and you can only actually afford a smaller amount, a lesser amount, a affordable amount, $60,000. That amount gives you enough cushion and enough leeway to actually afford a home even in an economic crisis. So make sure that you don't totally max out that number to say, well, I can afford, the bank said I can get $100,000 house. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's a trap, and you'll see why here shortly. So the first pro that I want to talk about right now of buying your first home, and the benefit is the low interest rates. Right now, the federal government is and the Federal Reserves are in cahoots and talking about heavily about zero interest rates. So now is one of the best times to secure a loan because of these low interest rates. So if you can negotiate some really, really favorable interest rate terms, that will make your house value even more beautiful in the future. The con to that is because interest rates are so low, obviously they are low because of the economic climate and the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in, which means house values are overinflated. And because house values are overinflated, that eventually those values will go down. So the houses on the market right now are overvalued because of the low interest rates. And so what will happen when interest rates correct is you'll see your value of your home come down. So you want to, and that's why I said in the beginning, knock off about 30-40% off that pre-approval cost that your bank is going to throw at you to cover that drop in the value of your home, to give you a closer number of what you'll truly be able to afford. and and just prepare yourself to make sure that you put yourself into position so when your house value drops, that you're not in too much house, if that makes sense. The second thing I would recommend during an economic time like this is buy a multifamily property, buy a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex home, and rent out the other units while you and your family live in one of the units, right? If you buy a duplex, live in one side and rent the other out. So that way you have some buffer, some extra buffer on top of the 30-40% that you knocked off in the initial pre-approval stage, but now you have an extra buffer of cushion, of financial cushion, because now someone is renting the other side. You're living in one unit A of the duplex. Unit B is rented out. So now you've just padded yourself with extra cash flow, extra revenue coming in from that tenant on the other side. And third thing is the cheap, easy money. Money is easy to get right now. It's cheap. And there are financial institutions loaning money right now because they can get it very easily. Banks can loan out money very easily. Financial institutions, traditional lenders can borrow money at low rates. And so it's free money to them. And so they're going to pass on some of those savings to you. And so that's my third reason as to why you should probably buy a home during this economic recession. Why I think it's a great time to continue to buy a home. And lastly, house values are going up. House values are going up because of these low interest rates. So the money, the capital required to borrow on a home is looking favorable right now, and it's causing the real estate market to really stay firm. Now, to backtrack again, make sure you stay engaged and stay tuned in and stay dialed into my channel, because interest rates, once those interest rates correct, home values will correct in kind. Traditionally, real estate is slow to react to the stock market. And so traditionally, the real estate follows behind whatever the economy is doing. So just because the pandemic is going on for several months now, and real estate prices are staying the same. No, real estate is slow to react, and that is something to be aware of when you're making that transition to owning a home. And so like I said, don't borrow too much. It's not a whole lot, but it's some key points, some quick points that I wanted to hit on to make sure that I do right by my listeners. Like I said, I always think it's a good deal to own a home. It's of good value to own your own home because it's yours, it's an asset. If you take care of it, it will pay you down the road. Over the years, America has bounced back from every economic climate that it has ever received and been exposed to. And so it's only expected that eventually that asset will come back. And so even if you buy a home right now that may be worth $100,000 or $200,000, that home eventually will be worth something to you and worth something to someone else, which you can eventually sell for a profit. And even if you don't sell it, guess what? When you pay off that home, it'll be 100% yours. And that's something you can't beat. That's something that you can never beat, something that someone can take away from you. It'll be yours. And so I encourage you, my podcast listeners, men, go out there looking for your first home, or you were in debates about getting your first home. Whether you're married, single, upside down, it doesn't matter. I think everyone should own their first home so that you can leave your mark in this world and have your piece of the pie because you deserve it and you're worth it. All right, gentlemen, this is all I got for you today. Take care of your families, take care of your business, and take care of business. This is Marcus Norman, Gentleman Style Podcast, signing off. Love you. Bye.